The fifth episode of Season 2 of House of the Dragon, episode Regent, was recently released. In this video, I'll count down the top 10 most compelling costumes from the episode, highlighting any callbacks to Season 1 and Game of Thrones. Today's sponsor is Gentle Band's Galactic Legends collection. More on that later in the video. For this video and the season at large, I'm seeking costumes that not only stand out visually, but also contribute to the storytelling and narrative. This episode, especially the scenes at Dragonstone, is quite dark, so I've had to lighten some pictures to highlight the details. And warning, there will be spoilers for all of Season 1 and episodes 1 through 5 of Season 2. And I won't touch on any Fire and Blood spoilers, so please refrain from leaving those in the comments below. Thank you. Now, before we dive into the countdown, I want to show a close-up of Daemon's black leather doublet as featured in the latest episode. Now, I noticed that the detail on his coat appears to be runestone iconography. Years ago in a video about Jaime Lannister and the Kingsguard's white cloak armor in Season 1, I pointed out that the engraving on the armor resembled the unis, or runestone style of the Viking Age, characterized by slim and stylized animals interwoven into tight patterns. Now, in our world, runestones served three main functions: memorials for the dead, self-promotion, and religious belief. When prominent people, usually men, died, a stone was erected by family members as a memorial piece. Now, the details on Daemon's jacket, particularly on the front and sleeves, resemble the unis style dating back to about 1100. You can see similar details on the chair with the broken back at Harrenhal, where Daemon sits. And you might recall that Daemon killed his wife, Lady Rhea Royce of Runestone, who wore leather armor engraved with a runic alphabet. According to the Game of Thrones book, House Royce has several sets of ancient bronze plate armor inscribed with runes, believed to make their wearers immune to injury. However, many Royces, including Rhea, who was murdered while wearing the armor, have died wearing them. Similar runestone details can be found on the costumes worn by Rhaenyra. Now, I'll leave it to you to decide what this might signify. Now, let's get on with the countdown. Number 10, Crispy Aegon. If you read the book Fire and Blood, you knew what to expect in this episode, as during the Battle of Rook's Rest, as depicted in the book, Aegon breaks his ribs and hip and is severely burned on half of his body, especially his left arm. In the previous episode, Aegon drunkenly flew while wearing Aegon the Conqueror's Valyrian steel armor, which is forged by dragon flame, which typically offers protection. You might assume that his face and arms, not covered by armor, would be the least protected, but it's actually the opposite. As Waldo Mason, a prosthetics designer for the show, explains in a behind-the-scenes video, the whole thing of his burn is not a direct burn from the flame, it's where his armor has become super hot and it's burned into his face like a hot plate. Valyrian armor in Game of Thrones lore is flame-resistant, as opposed to the normal armor, which would just melt. Now, I appreciate how the show depicts the maesters carefully removing individual sections of Aegon's cuirass, which is made up of a series of plates to cause the least amount of damage. The costume team created an additional set of broken-down armor for this episode. Series costume designer Caroline McCall noted, "That was a big breakdown job for Tim, our chief of breakdown, and he blackened it. He used some really lovely techniques on it." Then David, who does specialist jewelry, made some of the chainmail look like it was melted, trying to make it look as real as possible, like something that had been up in flames. Realistically, it is a bit ridiculous in my opinion, because no one could survive such an attack, let alone make it through the night without modern high-tech medical equipment. But the show has dragons and magic, so who am I to argue with that logic? Number 9, Lord Forrest Frey. Some audience members might be triggered, recalling that the last visit to the twins in Season 6 of Game of Thrones involved Arya murdering almost the entire male Frey household. One notable change by the House of the Dragon design team is the shift from the muddy brown palette that dominated episodes set at the twins, like the Red Wedding. Lord Walder Frey, head of House Frey, frequently wore robes and gowns in browns, olive, and gold hues. In contrast, it's a pleasant surprise to see the cool, silvery blue palette now featured, reflecting the house sigil of the two blue towers on a silvery gray field. Forrest, representing House Frey, wears a gown with metal fasteners at the neck and a crushed velvet overgown trimmed with an oversized fur collar. This new look is fitting, I think, considering the northern location of the Riverlands and adds to the authenticity, as Alicent mentioned in the Season 2 premiere that summer is well and truly through. Forrest's attire, including his livery and rings, also echoes the style of Simon's costumes at Harrenhal, another location in the Riverlands, as I reviewed in the previous episode, The Red Dragon and the Gold. As we only get a waist-up look at Forrest in the episode, here's a behind-the-scenes picture of actor Kenneth Collard in full costume. Now, I do wonder about his messy hair here, if this was the actor's doing, or did the hair team change their mind once they got on set and decided to go with a more natural look. Number 8, Alinda Massey hooded coat dress. Alinda Massey is a noblewoman of House Massey and a lady-in-waiting to Rhaenyra Targaryen. Now, a lady-in-waiting or a handmaiden is a woman in the service of a noblewoman of a higher status. Despite Alinda appearing last season, you might not have even have noticed her character because, for some strange reason, they dressed her in a servant's uniform. And you might recall in Game of Thrones that the handmaidens and the court, they often dressed in the fashion set out by the noble houses, such as Cersei Lannister and Marjorie Tyrell. So it appears that they have corrected this problem in Season 2. HBO didn't release many pictures of Alinda in this costume, so it's hard to make out the details. From the previous episode, it appears that she is wearing an undergown with a sideless surcoat or tabard over top. An observer on Twitter noticed that Alinda's gown features a crest of her house sigil of a triple spiral in green, red, and blue. And then she adds this dark red hooded coat dress when she's doing a reconnaissance mission for Mysaria and Rhaenyra. Now, I did think it was odd to go with the red, as the small folk tend to dress in earthier colors. But anywho, aside from my thought on the color, I really love it. It has a cut similar to Rhaenyra's coat dress. It's pretty fitted, and while the hood is quite full, enough to keep her incognito and dry in the rain, it has a nice pleating detail. And the texture of the fabric is pretty interesting too. Hopefully we'll get some better shots in the upcoming episode. Number 7, Jacaerys doublet. Jacaerys' new costume is a bit lower on my list because it's not significantly different from what he wore earlier in the season. In fact, it's nearly the same cut. Now, the bit on the front is called a plastron, which is commonly seen on military jackets. Here, I suppose it's meant to suggest some sort of protection, even if it's mostly decorative. Now, I have to admit that when I first saw it, it kind of reminded me of those keepsake boards that were all the rage on Pinterest for a while. The diamond pattern of the gambeson's quilting is practical, offering some protection if needed. Fencing uniforms derived from the gambeson often feature this same detail. So far this season, Jace has had very little to do aside from some politicking, so I look forward to seeing him in action, perhaps riding his dragon Vermax. Number 6, Baela Burgundy dress. Baela's palette this season has been very consistent with Targaryen red, reflecting her alignment with Jace. As she tells her grandfather Corlys Velaryon, she is blood and fire, not salt and sea. This shift from blue and silver dresses from Season 1 to red and black ensembles is prominently displayed here. Although this outfit first appeared in Episode 1, it was too far in the background to be clearly seen. Her dress features a less exaggerated Renaissance silhouette, closely resembling the dresses worn by young Alicent in the first half of Season 1 of House of the Dragon. One small quibble I have with this look is that it would be more flattering, I believe, with a period-correct foundation garment. This becomes particularly noticeable when she's sitting, as the silhouette appears too modern. I haven't noticed it on her other costumes as much because they have a high neckline. And while it's difficult to make out clearly, the dress seems to have a smock stomacher with dragon scale detailing. Additionally, there's iron gray mesh wire manipulated into the flames and embers climbing up the piece. I hope to see better pictures of the fabric and smocking detail in a future episode. I'm excited to present today's sponsor, Gentle Band's Galactic Collection. Since 2017, Gentle Bands has used unique materials to create rings that reflect your individuality. Perfect for weddings and great as gifts for friends, partners, or family members, their rings are not exclusive to men. Women can enjoy them too. Now, I ordered the Crimson Phantom ring along with a chain to complete the set. The Crimson Phantom ring is crafted from tungsten and features fragments of meteorite and dinosaur bone, making it a meaningful gift for my husband. Both of us are avid fans of history and fantasy, so this ring holds a special significance. Now, what convinced me to add a chain is their understanding that wearing rings isn't always convenient in certain situations. So as a solution, they've developed chains as an alternative. I find this idea absolutely brilliant. It's practical and stylish too. Now my husband can wear the ring around his neck when he doesn't want to wear it on his hand, keeping this precious gift with him at all times without the worry of it getting lost or damaged. Gentle Bands has generously offered a 25% discount on the purchase of their rings when they use the code COSTUMECO. Follow the link in the description and don't miss their free engraving service. Additionally, Gentle Bands will give away one free ring from the Galactic Collection to a lucky viewer. Please join me on my House of the Dragon season finale livestream roundup on Thursday, August 8th at 8 p.m. EST for the draw. The link is in the description below. Now back to the countdown. Number 5, Lady Sabbatha Frey, Gown and Wimple. I don't know if you remember how unattractively dressed the women of House Frey were in Game of Thrones. This is nothing against the design, as I believe this was purposeful, but they were ugly, bottle green dresses. Perhaps it was Walder himself who decided he wanted his daughters to look as unattractive as possible. That is why it is such a pleasant surprise to see Lady Sabbatha Frey, a noblewoman and the wife of Lord Forrest Frey. Like Forrest, she is dressed in a palette of blues and silvers. On her head, she wears a wimple, veil, and crown. A wimple consists of a cloth that covers the neck, cheeks, and sometimes the chin, and it's often accompanied by a veil that covers the head and neck. It was commonly worn by medieval European women as part of their attire. Now, when I saw it, it brought to mind Katharine Hepburn in The Lion in Winter. However, it is very similar to the headdress worn by Olivia de Havilland as Maid Marian in the 1938 film The Adventures of Robin Hood. Wimples are a common headdress worn in Westeros, often worn by the Septas and more recently by Rhaenyra Targaryen when in disguise. Additionally, Lady Olenna Tyrell was a prominent character in Game of Thrones who consistently donned this headdress. Now, while I can't make out Sabbatha in her full costume, it appears she's wearing an undergown with long sleeves and an overgown that features a wide collar trimmed in fur. Sabbatha and her husband Forrest appear united in their collective color palette and silhouette. Number 4, Lady Jane Eyre Velvet Gown. Lady Jane Eyre, the head of House Eyre, wears one of the prettiest costumes featured in House of the Dragon. Her gown appears to be made from silk velvet, similar to this example from Top Fabric of Soho. Upon closer inspection, the velvet is actually printed with a silver motif of a falcon soaring against a moon, reflecting House Eyre heraldry. The gown also features a silver embroidered stumpwork falcon on the bodice. The contrasting sleeves are crafted from a beautiful scallop brocade fabric, while the long hanging sleeves are lined in a silvery blue fabric, possibly a jacquard. This fabric pattern seems to resemble an abstracted sky with birds. And the overly long sleeves are pleated and tacked back, reminiscent of some of Cersei's gowns in Game of Thrones. Now, despite all these elements, the clean lines and the lack of trim or frills reflect the character's elegance. The look is completed with a delicate silver necklace with blue beads and complementary dangling earrings. Number 3, Rhaenyra Charcoal Gown. Wow, it's surprising to think that during Game of Thrones, principal characters like Cersei, Daenerys, and Sansa typically only had 3 new costumes per season due to the time and expense involved in creating them. So it's quite a change to see Rhaenyra donning a new costume or 2 per episode, with even more to come. This particular look is worn in the shadows of a dimly lit dragonstone. The dress is cut slightly above the ankle. While Daenerys often wore her gowns knee-length or mid-calf, she, like Rhaenyra, wore full-length gowns in the Pyramid Throne Room in Meereen. Regarding the color, Daenerys wore many gray dresses once she landed on Dragonstone. While it's hard to see clearly from these pictures, Rhaenyra's shorter dress has a textured fabric and some appliques, possibly metalwork, added to her collar and belt. The shape of the belt is similar to the one that Sansa wore in later seasons of Game of Thrones, and it's laced at the back in the same fashion as Cersei's gold obi in earlier seasons. Fans of the book have also noted the single braid that Rhaenyra is wearing, which is a nod to Queen Visenya Targaryen. Number 2, Corlys Velaryon, Gambeson, and Gown. So Corlys has taken a bit of a backseat this season as we've been introduced to many new characters. But despite this, I was delighted to see him in a new costume for Season 2, something befitting one of the wealthiest men in Westeros. The quality of the costume is evident, and you can hardly tell there's been a change in costume designer, as it looks like it would have come from the same closet of clothes. Like Alan and Adam of Hull, the sea snake is dressed in blue. I just want to mention that the blue shirt Corlys dons at the top of the episode, like Daemon's, his shirt features a beautiful honeycomb smocking detail. While House Velaryon's heraldry features a silver seahorse on a sea green ground, the show leans more heavily into the maritime blue. Corlys's gambeson, like Adam Velaryon's, is quilted with detachable sleeves. Arya Stark, among others, had a similar style where the sleeves and doublet are bound with leather and laced together through metal grommets. The quilting detail on the body and sleeves of the doublet reminds me of the quilting on Sweet Robin Arryn from Game of Thrones. The crest of his house, a silver seahorse, is featured prominently on the front of his gambeson. His sleeveless overgown has a wide band of dark blue Persian lamb similar to Simon Strong's overgown, and his belt is decorated with silver shell mounts. Corlys' wig, like all of the wigs this season, is much improved. Now, before we get to the episode's number 1 most compelling costume, here's one honorable mention. House Frey guards. Now, you might recall that in Game of Thrones, the armor worn by House Frey was quite odd, featuring soft leather coifs that had a Monty Python aesthetic. This design choice perhaps conveyed that Walder Frey's sons, Black Walder and Lothar Frey, were a couple of morons. Now, in contrast, in the latest episode of House of the Dragon, the House Frey guards are dressed in a much more sensible and practical manner. They wear a coat of plates, hardened leather gorgets similar to those worn by the Tullys, and metal open-face Sallet-style helms. It's a definite glow-up. And now the most compelling costume in the episode. Number 1, Rhaenyra Burgundy Gown. During the later seasons of Game of Thrones, I frequently complained that Daenerys never wore red until the very end. The design team argued that dressing her in red too early would limit their options, and they were avoiding the color due to the wartime setting. No more complaints here, though, because Rhaenyra is dressed in various shades of red this season. While discussing Daenerys, it's worth noting a key difference between her costumes and Rhaenyra's. Costume designer Michelle Clapton emphasized that Dany always wore pants under her gowns so she could quickly hop on her dragon and make a swift getaway. Rhaenyra, on the other hand, is currently grounded during the outbreak of war, so it's fitting that she is dressed in finery suitable for a queen. While this dress looks lovely in some still images, it doesn't quite capture the full impact as seen in the show. I love how this gown is slightly off the shoulder, making her look more vulnerable and less warrior-like. The beading on her shoulders embellishes the arrowhead smocking detail, similar to the embellishments on Daenerys' blue conqueror's dress, and it really captures the light from the fires in the hearth and the beeswax candles. For historical context, here's an example of this type of smocking as seen on a French robe à la Circassienne dating between 1778 and 80 from the collection at the Met. And then as she moves around Dragonstone, the slits in her gown reveal pleated underskirts in a contrasting charcoal gray or black. Let me know in the comments what you thought of the costumes in episode 5 or the season so far. And if you enjoy this kind of content, consider subscribing to my channel, or if you would like to support the channel on a regular basis, I've set up a Patreon with tiers that offer perks. You can find a link to that in my description. And I'll have more House of the Dragon content coming your way over the next few weeks. Thank you for spending time with me. I'll see you in the next video.